3 nights remained before the debt her husband lost at a poker table came due, and the man who claimed to own it intended to collect her along with the money. The town already believed the bargain counted, because no one in Copper Creek expected a woman's refusal to weigh more than a drunk man's word. The only person who stood when the cards were laid down was a rancher feared for his temper, his silence, and the half-dead cattle spread across his drought-struck land. He said the deal was not finished because no man had the right to wager what was never his to own. This is not a story about rescue. It is a story about 2 exhausted people who had stopped expecting loyalty from the world and what happened when they finally found it in each other. The smell of stale tobacco and spilled rye clung to the saloon curtains thick as smoke when Rose Bennett stepped through the bat-wing doors and saw her husband losing the last of their future 1 card at a time. Rain hammered the street outside. Mud sucked at wagon wheels beyond the windows. Inside, the lamps burned hot against the damp chill crawling through Copper Creek, and every face at the poker table looked sharp with anticipation. Eli Bennett's hands shook as he threw down another chip he did not possess. "You're finished," the banker muttered. "I ain't finished." Eli wiped sweat from his upper lip. "I got collateral." Rose stopped beside the door. Cold water dripped from the hem of her coat onto warped floorboards. Several men noticed her immediately and looked away just as fast. That frightened her more than if they had stared. Across the room sat Caleb Mercer. He leaned back in his chair near the wall, long legs stretched forward, broad shoulders still damp from the storm. Dust streaked one sleeve of his dark coat. His expression gave nothing away. Men lowered their voices around him without realizing they were doing it. Rose had seen him only twice before in town. Once at the mercantile buying feed on credit, once carrying a dead calf out of the back of a wagon while blood soaked through his gloves. People said Mercer Ranch was failing. People also said Caleb Mercer broke a ranch hand's jaw for striking a horse. Rose did not know which story she believed. Eli pointed toward her before she could move again. "There," he slurred. "My wife." Silence spread through the saloon in a hard ripple. Rose felt heat crawl beneath her wet collar despite the cold. The banker frowned. "You drunk beyond reason." "She cooks, keeps books, reads contracts." Eli laughed weakly. "Worth more than the damn horse I lost already?" A chair scraped sharply against wood. Caleb Mercer stood. The room seemed smaller when he did. "That's enough," he said. Eli sneered through whiskey breath. "Didn't ask your opinion. You don't wager people. She's my wife." Rose watched Caleb's jaw tighten once. Nothing more. "She ain't livestock." The man sitting across from Eli gave a nervous grin. "Now hold on. Nobody's collecting tonight. It's only cards." But Eli pushed forward anyway, desperation making him reckless. "If I win the next hand, debt's cleared." "And if you lose?" the banker asked quietly. Eli looked straight at Rose. A terrible stillness opened inside her chest. The answer arrived before he spoke it. "She goes with him." No one moved. Rain battered the windows harder. Rose remembered suddenly that she had not eaten since dawn. Her stomach cramped beneath her ribs while humiliation spread hot and poisonous through the room. Caleb walked toward the table slowly. "You'll fold the hand," he said. Eli laughed again, thin, frightened. "You planning to stop me?" "Yes." The word landed flat as iron. Rose saw several men shift uneasily. Eli swallowed. "Mind your own affairs." Caleb reached into his coat, withdrew folded bills, and dropped them onto the table. "Your debt." The banker blinked. "Mercer. Paid." Eli stared at the money like a starving man staring through a bakery window. "You buying my wife now?" he snapped. Caleb's gaze cut toward him at last. "No." The silence after that answer carried more shame than shouting would have. Rose felt every eye in the saloon turn toward her. She wanted to leave. She wanted to disappear entirely. Instead, she stepped forward, removed the thin gold wedding band from her finger, and laid it beside the cards. Eli looked stunned. "You can't—" "I can." Her voice remained calm somehow. "You settled that yourself." She turned toward the door. The cold rain struck her face the moment she stepped outside, sharp as gravel. She barely reached the hitching rail before her knees weakened beneath her. Behind her, the saloon doors burst open. Boots hit mud, not Eli's. Caleb stopped several feet away. "You got somewhere to stay?" She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "Mrs. Holloway rents rooms." "For how long?" 3 days. She swallowed. "After that, I don't know." Thunder rolled low across the plains. Caleb studied her with the same hard silence he carried inside the saloon. He looked tired, more than cruel. Deeply tired. "My foreman quit yesterday," he said. "Cook left 2 weeks ago. Ranch books are a disaster." Rose stared at him through rainwater. "You offering employment?" "I'm offering work. Room included." "And in exchange?" His expression darkened slightly, as if an insult touched something sore beneath the surface. Work. She believed him immediately, which frightened her more than distrust would have. "Why?" "You looked at that table like you already buried yourself." His voice stayed quiet. "I know what that looks like." The wind carried the scent of wet horses and chimney smoke between them. Rose thought of Mrs. Holloway's overdue rent ledger, of Eli drinking away every remaining cent, of winter approaching fast. "How far is the ranch?" 2 hours west. "And if I refuse?" "Then you refuse. No persuasion, no softness, only the plain truth." Something inside her loosened unexpectedly. By dawn the next morning, she sat beside Caleb Mercer in a rattling wagon headed toward land, half the county believed unsalvageable. He did not offer conversation. She did not ask for it. The plains rolled gray beneath low clouds, while cold air slipped through the wagon boards and numbed her fingertips. Caleb drove with steady hands despite exhaustion shadowing his eyes. After nearly an hour, he spoke without looking at her. "You can leave whenever you want." Rose watched distant cattle moving like dark specks across winter yellow grass. "That sentence tells me someone once stayed who should not have." His hands tightened briefly on the reins. "My wife died 3 winters ago." The words carried no invitation for sympathy. Rose nodded once. "I'm sorry." He said nothing afterward. By midday, Mercer Ranch came into view. The house leaned slightly east from settling foundation posts. One side of the barn roof sagged inward. Windmills turned slow and uneven against the pale sky. The ranch looked exactly like what it was, a place surviving through stubbornness alone. A young ranch hand emerged from the barn when they arrived. Barely 16, freckles across his nose, his eyes widened at Rose. "You hired a housekeeper?" "Her name's Rose," Caleb said. The boy blinked once at the correction. That surprised her. Inside, the ranch house smelled of cold iron and burnt coffee. Dust coated the shelves thick enough to mark fingerprints through it. Rose removed her gloves slowly. "How many hands remain?" 4. "How many cattle?" "Too few." She almost smiled despite herself. Caleb noticed. He almost smiled too. Almost. That evening she found the account ledger stacked beside the kitchen stove beneath a layer of dust and old receipts. She opened the first book, then the second, then the third. By the time Caleb returned from the barn after dark, she understood precisely why the ranch was dying. "You're being robbed," she said immediately. He paused near the doorway. "What?" She turned the ledger toward him. "The feed supplier charged twice for March deliveries. Taxes overdue 2 years. Your cattle counts don't match shipment records." Caleb removed his gloves slowly. "You figured that in one evening?" "I kept accounts for my father's grain office before marriage." She pointed at the page. "Your former foreman falsified numbers." A muscle moved sharply in Caleb's jaw. "Can you prove it?" "Yes." The kitchen fell quiet except for the hiss of wind outside. Rose suddenly became aware of how close he stood, of cold air still clinging to his coat, of exhaustion carved deep into the lines beside his mouth. "You should eat," she said softly. "I already did. You had whiskey and coffee." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You watching me?" I noticed patterns. For the first time since meeting him, genuine surprise crossed his face. Then he removed his hat and sat opposite her at the table. "Show me." 3 days passed beneath the hard wind and colder nights. Rose rose before dawn each morning because the stove took nearly an hour to warm the kitchen enough for water not to freeze in the basin. By the fourth morning, she had reorganized every ledger on the ranch, negotiated delayed payment terms through handwritten notices, and discovered half the herd suffered from infected hooves nobody had treated properly. Caleb watched all of it with increasing silence. The ranch hands watched harder. One evening she crossed the barn carrying lantern oil when she heard two men speaking near the stalls. "She won't last," one muttered. "She lasted longer than the cook. She ain't soft." "No," the older hand admitted. "That's the trouble." Rose kept walking without announcing herself. The barn smelled of hay, sweat, and winter dust. She knelt beside a limping steer and cleaned the split hoof carefully while cold seeped through her skirts. "You know livestock medicine too?" Caleb's voice came from behind her. She did not startle. "Farmers learn quickly or they lose animals. You ain't afraid of getting kicked?" The animal's frightened, not vicious. She wrapped the hoof tight. When she finally looked up, Caleb still stood there watching her. Not the steer. Her. "What?" she asked. "You keep doing work nobody asked for." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "Failing serves neither of us." Something unreadable crossed his expression, then disappeared. That night snow came early. Wind battered the ranch house hard enough to shake the shutters while Rose folded laundry beside the stove. Caleb entered carrying split wood across one shoulder, snow melting through his dark hair. "You should have waited till morning," she said. "The storm gets worse overnight." He stacked wood beside the stove. Rose noticed blood across his knuckles. "What happened?" "Fence wire snapped." "Sit down. I'm fine. Sit." The word surprised both of them. After a moment he obeyed. Rose cleaned the cut carefully while he sat rigid beside the stove, large hands motionless against his knees. The room smelled faintly of cedar smoke and wet wool. "You always order people around?" he asked. "Only stubborn men." His mouth twitched once, barely. Her fingers brushed his palm accidentally while wrapping the cloth. The contact lasted no more than a second. Still, something shifted quietly between them. The next morning brought trouble. A rider arrived just after sunrise, wearing a dark town coat too fine for ranch work. Frost silvered his mustache. Sheriff Collins. Rose recognized him instantly from town. He dismounted slowly while Caleb stepped onto the porch. Mercer. Collins. The sheriff's gaze moved toward Rose through the doorway. Heard Bennett's wife moved in. Rose stiffened. Caleb answered before she could. "She works here." Collins gave a humorless smile. "Town's talking. The town usually does." The sheriff removed folded papers from his coat. "The bank filed notice against your property. Final collection due in 30 days. Rose took the papers before Caleb could refuse them. The numbers confirmed her fears immediately. Interest inflated deliberately. Payment schedules altered. Someone wanted Mercer Ranch gone. "Who handled this filing?" she asked. Collins looked mildly surprised she spoke at all. "Harland Pike." Caleb's expression hardened instantly. Rose felt it beside her like a sudden temperature change. "Pike owns half the rail contracts west of here," Collins added. "He's been buying failed ranches cheap." "Mercer Ranch ain't for sale," Caleb said. The sheriff shrugged. "Then pay the debt." After he rode away, Rose reread the documents carefully while a cold wind whipped across the porch. He altered the mortgage terms illegally. Caleb looked toward her sharply. "You sure?" "Yes. You can prove it?" "I can try." He studied her for a long moment. Why would Pike care enough to cheat me? Because desperate men miss details. The answer landed hard because both of them knew it was true. That evening, Rose rode into town alone, despite Caleb telling her the roads would ice before dark. She returned 2 hours later carrying legal records from the county office tucked beneath her coat. Caleb met her beside the barn. "You ignored instructions. You needed documents. You could have frozen." "I didn't." Snow clung white across her lashes. Caleb swore under his breath and took the papers from her with rough carefulness. His fingers paused briefly against hers. Cold skin, warm calluses. "You don't think much about danger," he muttered. "I think about necessity." Inside the kitchen, she spread the documents across the table while ranch lamps flickered gold around them. "There," she pointed firmly. Original interest rate, different from Collins's notice. Caleb leaned lower beside her, close enough that she smelled cold leather and pine smoke clinging to his coat. He forged county copies? No. Rose tapped another signature. Someone inside the clerk's office amended them afterward. Silence stretched. Then Caleb looked at her differently. Not like hired help, not like obligation, like possibility. A week into their arrangement, Rose discovered half the ranch hands had stopped calling her ma'am and started asking her opinion before making decisions. She also discovered Caleb Mercer followed her whenever the weather turned dangerous, never openly, never admitting it. But every time she crossed icy pasture or rode the north fence line alone, he appeared somewhere nearby within minutes. One afternoon, she climbed into the hayloft searching inventory records and slipped on loose straw near the ladder edge. A hand caught her arm immediately, hard, steady. Caleb pulled her back before she fell. For one suspended second, she stood against his chest while dust drifted golden through slanted barn light. Neither moved, neither breathed properly. Then he released her and stepped back. "You watch where you're walking. You were already watching for me." His gaze locked with hers. The silence afterward felt warmer than the loft itself. That same evening, Mrs. Holloway arrived unexpectedly with fresh bread wrapped in cloth against the cold. The older widow surveyed the kitchen once before nodding approvingly. "Told the ladies in town you'd survive out here." Rose smiled faintly. "They disagreed?" "They said Mercer Ranch buries optimism." Mrs. Holloway lowered her voice. "Now they say the place smells like supper again." Caleb paused near the doorway carrying saddle tack. Mrs. Holloway watched him openly. "You eat better too," she observed. "I eat the same." "That ain't true." The older woman's eyes softened toward Rose. "A house changes when somebody worth trusting lives inside it." Caleb said nothing. But later that night, Rose found fresh firewood stacked outside her bedroom door before dawn frost settled in. No note, no explanation, only action. 2 days later, the first real trouble arrived. Rose entered the Copper Creek Mercantile carrying supply lists while conversation buzzed warm around the stove. The air smelled of coffee grounds, damp wool, and cured leather. Then Harlan Pike walked in. Tall, heavy-set, expensive coat. The room quieted immediately. Pike smiled without warmth when he noticed her. "Well," he drawled, "Mercer sends his new bookkeeper shopping now." Rose continued reviewing flour prices calmly. Mercer Ranch pays its own accounts, for now. Several townspeople pretended not to listen. Pike approached closer. "You know Mercer's finished, don't you? 30 days and that land belongs to me." Rose met his gaze evenly. "Only if your documents survive examination." His expression sharpened. Dangerous now. "Careful, widow. I'm not widowed. Not legally, perhaps." Pike leaned nearer, though Bennett's drinking himself into a grave fast enough. A deep voice cut through the silence behind them. "She paid for the flour yet?" Caleb. Every head in the mercantile turned. He crossed the room slowly, dust from the road still coating his boots. Pike smiled thinly. "Protective lately, Mercer. Only tired of hearing you talk." Rose felt the tension gather instantly between the two men. Pike's eyes narrowed. "You think she saves your ranch?" Caleb set folded bills on the counter. "I know she caught your fraud." The mercantile went completely silent. Pike laughed once. "Big accusation. Truth usually is." Rose watched townspeople exchange quick glances. The balance had shifted. Not fully, but enough. Caleb collected the supplies himself before turning toward the door. Rose followed. Outside, cold wind swept dust down the street while wagon chains rattled nearby. "You shouldn't antagonize him publicly," she said quietly. "He threatened you publicly. I can handle Pike." "I know." The answer stopped her. Caleb adjusted the flour sack across his shoulder. "That ain't why I stepped in." She looked at him then. Really looked. At the exhaustion beneath his restraint. At the fierce protective instinct he seemed almost angry to possess. Something warm and frightening moved slowly through her chest. Inside part 3 of their strange arrangement, winter deepened around Mercer Ranch, but so did something steadier than obligation. This is Dusty Vows, where stories like hers live. Women who were underestimated, men who did not yet know what they were missing. If you want the next story the moment it arrives, subscribe now. Then, back to the ranch. That night, Caleb found Rose asleep at the kitchen table beside open ledgers. Lantern light gilded loose strands of hair near her cheek. Ink smudged one fingertip. The stove crackled low, while snow hissed softly against the windows. She looked exhausted. Safe, too. He could not remember the last time this house looked inhabited instead of endured. Caleb removed his coat quietly and draped a blanket across her shoulders. Rose stirred instantly anyway. "You're back late. Fence repairs." She straightened, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to fall asleep. You worked 16 hours. So did you." Caleb poured coffee gone lukewarm in the pot and drank it without complaint. Rose watched him carefully. "What happened to your wife?" The question settled heavy between them. He considered refusing. Instead, he stared into the dark coffee a while before speaking. Fever took her. His voice stayed flat. Winter roads closed. Doctor never arrived. Rose's expression softened but held no pity. Only understanding. "You blame yourself." "I buried her." He set the cup down harder than intended. "Doesn't matter whose fault it was." The kitchen grew quiet again. Then, Rose spoke softly. "Grief makes people think suffering is an obligation." Caleb looked toward her sharply. "You speaking from experience?" "My father died owing creditors." Her fingers tightened slightly around the blanket edge. "Afterward, I married Eli because survival looked more practical than loneliness." "Wasn't practical." "No." A long silence passed. Then Caleb rose abruptly. "You should sleep." Rose nodded. At the doorway, she paused. "So should you." He watched her disappear down the hall and realized suddenly he no longer thought of the ranch house as empty. The trouble with Harlan Pike worsened by the end of the second week. A rider delivered notice that county officials would inspect Mercer Ranch records personally. Rose understood the meaning immediately. They expect missing numbers. "There ain't missing numbers anymore," Caleb replied. "They'll invent them if necessary." She spent the next 2 days organizing receipts while icy wind screamed outside hard enough to rattle loose roof boards. On inspection morning, 3 officials arrived, with Pike himself trailing behind them. The ranch kitchen smelled sharply of coffee and tension. Rose laid out ledgers one by one across the table. Pike smiled coldly. Mercer never kept records this clean before. "Because Mercer never had me before," Rose answered. One official frowned while reviewing tax entries. "These amendments appear inconsistent." "Exactly," Rose said calmly. "And the alterations originate from county filing copies after submission dates." Pike's face darkened. Caleb stood near the stove, watching everything with dangerous stillness. The older official adjusted spectacles slowly. "You accusing county clerks of fraud?" "I'm accusing Mr. Pike of paying someone to commit it." Silence. Wind battered the windows. Pike stepped toward her. Careful. Caleb moved instantly between them. Not dramatic, not loud, simply immovable. "Enough," he said. The officials exchanged uneasy looks. Rose saw it clearly then. Not fear of Pike. Fear of Caleb Mercer finally having reason to fight back. After hours of review, the officials left carrying copied documents for further examination. Pike lingered near the porch before mounting his horse. "This ain't finished," he warned. Rose answered before Caleb could. "No, it isn't." Pike rode away through blowing snow. Caleb turned toward her slowly once he vanished. "You shouldn't provoke dangerous men. You married one once." The corner of his mouth shifted unexpectedly, a real, almost smile this time. That evening the storm worsened. By midnight, snow trapped one ranch hand beyond the north pasture fence. Caleb saddled horses immediately. "I'm coming," Rose said. "No, you need another rider. It's dangerous, so is leaving him there." They rode into white darkness together beneath cutting wind that froze breath against scarves and lashes. Snow lashed Rose's cheeks raw, while horses struggled through drifts nearly knee-high. They found the missing ranch hand beside a broken fence post, half-conscious from the cold. Caleb lifted the young man onto his own horse without hesitation. "Ride back," he ordered Rose. "What about you? I'll follow." But halfway home, Caleb's horse stumbled hard, crossing frozen creek ice. Rose heard the crack before she saw him fall. The horse screamed. Ice shattered beneath them. "Caleb!" She dismounted instantly, cold slicing through her lungs. Caleb dragged himself partly from the freezing water while the horse thrashed wildly against broken ice. Rose dropped flat against the creek bank and grabbed his arm. "Leave the horse!" she shouted. Caleb ignored her completely. Of course he did. Together they fought the terrified animal free inch by inch while freezing water soaked Caleb nearly waist deep. By the time they reached solid ground, his hands shook violently from the cold. Rose stripped off her outer coat and shoved it toward him. "You'll freeze, so will you. I know how to survive winter." She forced the coat around his shoulders anyway. "Move." Back at the ranch, she boiled water while Caleb sat rigid beside the stove, dripping melted ice across the floorboards. "You could have died," she snapped. "So could the horse." Rose stared at him in disbelief. Unexpectedly, she laughed once, tired, breathless, real. Caleb looked at her sharply. "What? You nearly drowned and still argued about livestock?" His gaze held hers across the firelight. The room felt unbearably warm suddenly. "Rose." The sound of her name in his voice stopped her breath entirely. First time. Heavy with something neither dared touch directly. He seemed to realize it too, because silence followed immediately afterward. Outside, snow hammered the ranch roof through the dark. Inside, neither of them moved away. By the start of the third week, Copper Creek spoke about Rose Mercer's ranch as though she already belonged there. Not allowed to her face. But whispers traveled. The gossip shifted from scandal toward curiosity. Mrs. Holloway noticed first. "Town stopped calling you Bennett," she said quietly while purchasing sugar beside Rose at the mercantile. "That means something." Rose pretended not to react, but that night she lay awake listening to wind-scraped branches across the roof and wondered why the thought frightened her less than it should have. 2 days later, Eli Bennett returned. Drunk. Desperate. He staggered into Mercer Ranch near dusk while Caleb worked cattle in the south field. Rose opened the door and smelled whiskey before he spoke. "You left me ruined," Eli muttered. "You ruined yourself. You think Mercer wants you?" His eyes gleamed ugly in lantern light. "Man only took you because he pities damaged goods." Rose stiffened. Then Eli grabbed her wrist, hard. The kitchen chair crashed backward as she jerked away. Bootsteps thundered across the porch. Caleb hit the doorway like a storm. Eli barely turned before Caleb dragged him backward by the coat and slammed him against the porch post hard enough to shake snow loose from the roof. "You touch her again," Caleb said quietly, "and they won't find enough left of you to bury." Eli paled instantly. Rose had never heard a human voice sound colder. Caleb released him roughly. "Get off my land." Eli stumbled toward the yard, hatred twisting his face. "She ain't yours?" Caleb's answer came without hesitation. "I know." That frightened Rose more than possession would have, because it was true. After Eli vanished into the dark, Caleb stood breathing hard beside the porch rail while snow drifted around him. Rose stepped outside carefully. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes." He stared into the darkness where Eli disappeared. "I did." She looked at the blood drying across his knuckles again. Always his hands, always proof he protected through action before words. The cold between them felt thinner now, dangerously thin. He said her name once more, 3 nights later. The second time carried even more weight. Rose stood in the barn treating a fevered calf after midnight, while lantern light flickered gold across rough wood beams. The air smelled of hay and medicine tincture. Caleb entered quietly behind her. "You should sleep." "So should you." The calf shifted weakly beneath her hands. Caleb crouched beside her, close enough their shoulders nearly touched. "You keep choosing this ranch," he said. "I keep choosing work. That ain't the same anymore." His gaze stayed on the animal instead of her. Rose. Soft this time. Not startled like before. Intentional. Her chest tightened painfully. Before she could answer, hoofbeats thundered outside. A ranch hand burst through the barn doors breathless with cold. "Fire," he gasped. "North storage shed." They ran immediately. Flames clawed high against black sky by the time they reached the shed. Wind drove sparks across dry winter grass while smoke burned harsh inside Rose's lungs. "Buckets!" Caleb shouted. Men scrambled through chaos. Rose saw it before anyone else did. Oil. The fire spread too quickly. Someone set it deliberately. Then she spotted boot tracks leading away from the shed toward the road. Harlan Pike. The realization hit instantly. Caleb saw it in her expression. "Go inside," he ordered. "No, Rose, I found the proof." She pointed toward the tracks cutting through snow. Caleb's face hardened with terrifying understanding. Together they managed to stop the fire before it reached the barn, but the storage shed collapsed entirely by dawn. Smoke lingered bitter and thick across the ranch. The ranch hands gathered silently nearby while gray morning spread across frozen fields. Rose touched the charred ledger box beside the ruins. Empty. Pike had burned the financial records, proving fraud. For the first time since arriving at Mercer Ranch, hopelessness pressed hard against her ribs again. Caleb came to stand beside her. "We'll rebuild. He destroyed the evidence. We still got testimony." "Against Pike?" She shook her head. "No one in town risks that." Caleb looked toward the smoking ruins a while. Then, unexpectedly, he reached down and picked up something half buried beneath ash. A metal seal stamp. County clerk markings etched into iron. Rose stared. Pike's hired clerk must have dropped it while searching the shed. Proof. Real proof. Caleb handed it to her carefully. "You were right. The words sounded simple. They were not." He said her name differently that time near the burning shed, and they both heard it. "Tell me, did you feel that shift, or was it only her? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone." Now, back to the story. The county hearing took place 3 days later inside the church hall because the courthouse furnace had failed again. Cold crept through the floorboards while townspeople packed the benches, whispering behind gloved hands. The room smelled of wet wool and melting snow. Harlan Pike stood near the front looking confident until Rose produced the clerk's seal. Silence swept the hall immediately. The county judge examined the iron stamp carefully while Rose explained the altered filings with calm, precise detail. "You kept copies of every original document?" the judge asked. "Yes." Pike's confidence cracked visibly for the first time. "That proves nothing," he snapped. Rose opened one final ledger. "Actually, it proves motive." She read aloud land purchase records showing Pike acquired failed ranches immediately after fraudulent foreclosures. Murmurs spread sharply through the church. The town gossip, Mrs. Wheeler, who once refused to sit beside Rose during Sunday service, stared openly now with something close to admiration. Pike pointed furiously toward Caleb. "You think this rancher survives without cheating? Mercer's drowning in debt." "Yes," Rose answered evenly, "but debt is not the same as theft." The room went still again. The judge's expression hardened. By afternoon, Harlan Pike faced formal fraud charges and seizure of his pending foreclosure claims. Mercer Ranch survived, barely, but legally. Outside the church hall, snow melted slowly beneath pale sunlight while townspeople gathered in buzzing clusters. Several men shook Caleb's hand. Most spoke directly to Rose, too. Not around her. To her. Mrs. Wheeler approached awkwardly, adjusting her gloves. "You handled yourself respectfully." Rose nearly laughed at the effort hidden inside the compliment. "Thank you." As the crowd dispersed, Caleb stood beside the wagon, unusually quiet. "It's over," Rose said softly. "No." His eyes stayed fixed on the church doors where deputies escorted Pike outside. Men like him don't stop clean. The warning proved true that same night. Rose woke near midnight to the sound of breaking glass. She sat upright instantly. Footsteps downstairs. Then smoke. Not another shed this time. The ranch house. Rose threw open her bedroom door just as Caleb reached the hallway carrying a rifle. "Back window," he ordered. Another bottle crashed downstairs. Flames roared instantly. Pike. Desperation made men stupid. Caleb shoved open the rear kitchen door while smoke thickened through the hall. Rose coughed hard against the burning air. Then she remembered the desk drawer, the surviving mortgage release papers. Without them, Mercer Ranch could still face legal chaos. She turned back. Caleb caught her arm immediately. "No. We need those documents. We need you alive." She pulled free anyway and disappeared into smoke before he could stop her. The kitchen burned hot enough to blister skin instantly. Rose wrapped her sleeve across her mouth and lunged toward the desk near the stove. Heat screamed across the ceiling. She found the papers. Then, part of the roof collapsed. A heavy beam crashed between her and the doorway. "Rose!" Caleb's voice thundered through smoke somewhere beyond the flames. "I'm here." The burning beam blocked escape entirely. Then Caleb appeared through smoke itself. Madman. Absolute madman. He shoved through falling sparks, grabbed her waist, and hauled her toward the side wall. "The window," he coughed. Together they smashed through the glass and hit frozen ground outside, moments before flames consumed the kitchen fully. Rose rolled onto her back, gasping cold air, while snow hissed against burning wood. Caleb knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders hard enough to hurt. "You don't run into fire for paper. We needed it. I needed you breathing." The words broke from him raw and furious. Rose stared at him through drifting smoke. Then suddenly she understood. Not gradually, not cautiously, completely. The ranch hands extinguished the blaze before dawn, though half the kitchen suffered heavy damage. Pike was arrested before sunrise trying to flee town. By morning the danger had ended. Yet neither Rose nor Caleb knew how to return to the careful distance they once maintained. Too much had burned away with the fire. 3 days later, Rose packed her belongings quietly, not because she wished to leave, because she feared staying without certainty. Caleb found her folding dresses into a small trunk while afternoon light stretched pale across the bedroom floor. "You going somewhere?" She kept her hands steady with effort. The foreclosure ended. The arrangements finished. "No." She looked at him then. He stood in the doorway, tense as drawn wire. "You don't owe me employment anymore," she said. "I ain't talking about employment." Silence spread between them, heavy, trembling. Rose closed the trunk slowly. "Caleb, don't," he stepped inside finally. "Don't say my name like goodbye." Her breath caught. He looked exhausted again. But not from ranch work this time, from resisting something too long. "I buried one woman already," he said quietly. "Spent 3 years believing surviving counted as living. Then you walked into this house carrying ledgers and stubbornness and started rebuilding every ruined piece of it before I even understood what was happening." Rose felt tears sting unexpectedly. Caleb continued before she could speak. "You asked once why I offered you work." His voice roughened. "Truth is, I knew the second you took off that wedding ring in the saloon that you were lonelier than anybody should be." She swallowed hard. "So were you." "Yes." The single word nearly undid her. He moved closer slowly now, careful despite everything between them. "I don't know much about doing this right," he admitted, "but I know the house goes cold when you leave a room." Rose laughed softly through tears. Caleb reached toward her once, stopped halfway, then lowered his hand. The withheld gesture hurt more than touch would have, so she crossed the distance herself. Their hands met between them, warm, firm, certain. "You never asked me to stay," she whispered. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Rose." 3rd time. Last time. He said her name like a vow already chosen. "I'm asking now." Outside, evening wind moved softly through the plains while ranch hands repaired fence posts near the barn, and smoke curled steadily from the damaged kitchen chimney. Life continuing. Quietly earned. Rose looked toward the open bedroom doorway, toward the ranch house she had slowly filled with warmth again. Then, back at Caleb Mercer. "Yes," she said without hesitation. That spring, the rebuilt kitchen smelled constantly of bread, cedar smoke, and strong coffee, because Caleb finally admitted burnt beans did not qualify as supper. The ranch hands stopped knocking before entering, because Rose kept records better than any foreman they had known. Mrs. Holloway claimed publicly she predicted the entire outcome from the beginning, though nobody believed that entirely. One warm evening after branding season ended, Caleb found Rose sitting alone on the porch steps, watching dusk settle purple across the plains. Without speaking, he handed her a freshly painted wooden sign, Mercer Ranch, and beneath it in smaller lettering, Rose Mercer, Accounts and Holdings. She stared at it a while. You added my name. You rebuilt half the place. He sat beside her heavily, seemed dishonest not to. The porch board still held warmth from the day's sun. Crickets hummed through tall grass beyond the yard, while distant cattle shifted softly in the dark. Rose leaned gently against his shoulder. Caleb stayed perfectly still for a moment, then rested his hand over hers. No performance, no grand declaration, only choice, plain and irreversible. She walked into that arrangement with nothing but a ruined marriage and 3 nights before the town decided her future for her. He walked out of it, understanding the strongest thing on his ranch had never been his fences or cattle, but the woman who refused to let him drown quietly.